Hello and welcome. I'm glad you could be with us tonight. I'm talking with a very interesting Minnesotan. Mike Ciresi is with me, and we're talking about a big topic, early childhood education. I have been very proud to live in Minnesota and be a Minnesotan for years and years, but I'm not proud of one part of our experience here, and that is the achievement gap between children of color and other children. We are, as many of you probably know and don't like to talk about, the lowest in the country in terms of that ratio. And so things have to change in that regard. And Mike has taken it upon himself and other leaders that he's working with to do something about this. For those of you who might be new in Minnesota, Mike is a prominent trial attorney, lawyer. He is now working with Ciresi Conlon, a smaller firm that he is a founding partner of. He was with Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Ciresi for years and years.
Over 40.
Over 40? I
Right.
didn't realize it was that many years, Mike. He's also been a man who's given a lot back to our community. And many of you have worked with him on boards, I'm sure. He's right now on the St. Thomas University Board of Trustees. He's been on that board years
Long time, Mary.
and years.
25 years. About,
When he gets into a job, he stays, right?
Right, I do.
He's also on the Children's Hospital Board of Directors. He was with the U of Minnesota Law School Board. He's very involved with a small nonprofit called, I have to always think about this title, Close the Gaps by 5, and we'll talk more about that later. So I'm delighted that he could be here tonight and talk about early childhood education. So all that talk, but
Thank you
welcome,
for having
welcome.
me. Thank you, Mary. It's good to be back with you.
Yes. We were together for an interview back in 2005, and it
Was it that long ago?
doesn't seem that long ago, does it?
It's a long time.
As I prepared for the show, pondered and wondered what was kind of your personal motivation to get involved with early childhood education?
Well, I think it goes back to my own childhood. My father had a 7th grade education, and he never saw a bond issue that he didn't like and that he didn't vote for. He fervently believed in education for everybody. He sent us to Catholic schools in those days. You could go to them for, $5 a month. And we came from the lower middle class. But he just believed that in this country, everybody should have an education and everybody should have health care. So that is carried through with me through my entire life. I believe fervently that if we educate our children, and all children are our children, regardless of their faith, their color, or anything else, all of these kids in this state are our collective children. And if we educate them and we keep them healthy, by and large, they're going to do the good things, and they're going to return productivity to the state and make this the great state that we think it is.
Just a little more detail about your dad, because I found it so interesting when I read this about him. He was born in the United States.
He was.
But then he spent a lot of early years in Sicily.
Right, he went
Tell
back.
us the story.
He was born here, as most of his siblings were, but some were born in Sicily because his father immigrated to the United States from Sicily. Then he went back because they were going to get his grandfather. And while they were back there, the First World War broke out worldwide, and the United States got involved. And so he ended up living there until he was about in 6th grade. So he came back. He would have been in 6th grade, but he came back and they put him in like 2nd or 3rd grade. And he stayed in school till 7th grade when he was a little bit older. And he went out and started selling fruits and vegetables with his father from a horse and buggy on Summit Avenue.
That is just such interesting. And so there we have the immigrant lifestyle in a way, or immigrant story, don't we?
Well, we're all in this nation. We call it a nation, but nation really, if you look back at what that means, it means it's a one people, one culture. We're not a one culture. We're a republic with many, many different cultures. That's the beauty of America, and it's something that we ought to remember. And, sometimes in today's world, we forget that.
We do, but that's the point, republic instead of one nation, that makes sense. I first started realizing that you were so into early childhood education when I read a very interesting editorial not so long ago, and you and Art Rolnick were the writers, authors. How did you and Art hook up to push this topic and this issue and this subject?
That's a very good question, Mary, which you probably know. Art and I first met on the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation Board. It's called MELF, and that was one of the predecessors to Close Gaps by 5. That was in the early, right at the turn of the century, and it was an organization here in Minnesota that was formed by Minnesota businesses and private sector organizations to look at early education. And what we did is, and the legislature originally gave us $1 million, which we turned back. We said we don't want any money from the government. We want to be honest brokers on this. So we wanted to look at how do you educate and make sure that kids, when they come into school, are ready to be educated. And that started the whole early learning education process here in Minnesota from the standpoint of developing the parent-aware rating system for early learning systems. And that became known as the Minnesota model, which is...
And Dwayne Benson,
Dwayne Benson, who just passed away.
Who just
yes,
died.
He was the executive director. A great man, a great Minnesotan.
I had not realized he had that post.
Yeah, he did, and great fellow. So, and that whole process was built on the research that Art Rolnick had done at the Federal Reserve, which showed that if you invest $1 in early learning, you get a $16 return. Yeah. And what that means is that if you get kids educated and they start school ready to learn, that they are able to go up the ladder of K through 12, and then they may go on to a trade school, they may go on to college, whatever, but you see a $16 to $1 return for kids that are ready for school when they start. And that started the scholarship program, which is what Close Gaps by 5 is now about. And Minnesota's been the leader in that.
And that's exciting, isn't it, to think about. I want to hear more about Close Gaps by 5 in a little bit. But that 1 to 16 ratio, if you break it down, it's not only the productivity that comes out of the kids who get, through high school and maybe college, but it's how we also don't spend money then on detention centers.
Correct.
And prisons, et cetera.
And welfare and other types of aids that we give to folks who are not educated and who may get themselves into trouble. Right. So it's just, and it makes sense. And I think what we have to remember is that all of us need help along the way. My mother died when I was in 7th grade. I was 12 years old. She had cancer, and she was sick for a long period of time. She died of breast cancer. And I probably would not have been a lawyer if it wasn't for the people who surrounded me. It was my dad's sisters. It was the nuns at St. Andrew's Grade School over in Como Park, not too far from here. It was the neighbors that, rallied around and gave me support when I was probably going to go off the tracks. And that is what young people need. They need encouragement, they need support, and they need direction. So that comes with education, and that is why it's been a lifelong commitment of both Ann and myself. Our own private foundation, we put a lot of effort into education at all levels.
And I noticed you have been a big supporter of the neighborhood NAS.
Yes. Northside Achievement Zone.
Northside Achievement Zone.
And that's built on that same principle, Northside Achievement Zone.
Involving the parents more.
The parents and the neighbors and surrounding the kids who come up with, some difficult surroundings sometimes. And those are the ones you have to surround and give them the help that they need to go on. Education, Mary, is a three-legged stool. It's the student, it's the school itself, and it's the family or community that surrounds them. And each one of those three legs of that stool have to be doing their job, or the child probably is not going to be educated well. And if one of those legs falters, the student has a much more difficult time to advance. And so, NAS is the type of system that is surrounding these kids who are coming from, it's not just poverty, because kids who have been in poverty have been educated throughout the history of America. But it may be violence, it may be that they only have one parent or they have no parents. So, Granny has to take care of them.
Parents working two and three jobs.
Or parents are working 2 or 3 jobs because of the economics of today. So we can go on and on and on and show all these things that are influencing whether or not a child is going to get the type of support that she or he needs to get educated.
The proposal that you and Art came up with is really kind of a compromise proposal, isn't it?
Well, it's
in terms of the funding.
In terms of the funding, let me back off a little bit. You mentioned something at the outset. You said the gaps that we have in Minnesota are outrageous, and they are. It's a moral outrage.
I'm accurate, right? We are the lowest.
You are very accurate for
shocking,
graduation
really.
rates for children of color, as opposed to white children. We are the worst in the nation. For African American children, 50th. For Native American, 50th. For Latino, 49th.
It's just
And the
sort of
gap
unbelievable.
It is, and those are the gaps between children of color and white children, and there's no reason for it. I mean, we're worse than not only New York and California and Connecticut, we're also worse than Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana. I mean, the worst in the nation.
And I just have to ask you, why? How did this come to be? Do you
Well, it's multifactorial.
theories?
Yeah, I think everybody knows what the issues are. There's no silver bullet to resolve it. That's why I talk about the three-legged stool. But there's cultural ignorance. We don't have cultural intelligence. We have a teacher workforce that is predominantly white. And I'm not saying all, but some do not have the cultural intelligence to deal with children of color in the way that they should be dealt with, to understand where they come from, what their problems are, how they're coming up in life. So there's a lot of things we need to do. That's just one factor of it. So we look at it and we say, all right, how do you do this? First of all, you start at pre-K. Now, Governor Dayton had, universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. Now, that's a great idea. I mean,
And just for 4-year-olds.
right, just for 4-year-olds. Nobody can argue with that. I mean,
And a lot of states have that plan, don't they?
They do, but that's a nice idea. It's a great idea. Nobody's going to argue with it. The fact is, it's going to cost billions of dollars just to put in infrastructure and everything else to do that. And you're also putting dollars after children who otherwise could afford to have pre-K education. Their parents can afford it. So what we've done, and Art and I looked at this, and others have looked at this, and we've said, and Close Gaps by 5 has looked at this, obviously, and said, all right, we have about 35,000 children in poverty in this state that could use scholarships. And Governor Dayton was good on this. He gave money for scholarships, not as much. We argued for more, but reasonable people can differ. And we will lobby Governor Walz to do better than Governor Dayton did.
And he is saying this is one of his
He is saying that
focus.
pre-K education is. Now, which way we go is going to be the issue. The Minnesota model is the scholarships. People around the country are talking about it and doing the same thing. And what it does is it gets money to the kids who can least afford to go to pre-K. Because if you get pre-K, by the time you get to K, you're ready for school. If you're not, you're already behind.
Yeah.
So that's a real problem for kids who come up without this type of education. So what we're saying with this new model is that you not only should devote it to kids who are at the lowest economic strata, but also the lower middle class, which is really strapped today. So that's the type of modeling that we're talking about.
When I read the cost for middle class and lower middle class families for preschool, what is it? I mean, it was shocking. It was $16,000 a year,
Yes.
roughly.
Yeah.
And that's
can
a
be that high.
huge hunk out of income.
Right, and look at this. Let's say that your either a single parent home or a two-parent home where both parents are working, all right? And let's say that you live in northern Minnesota and you're working for Arctic Cat, maybe, and you live in one town which is 50 miles away, and you drive to work every day, back and forth, okay? If you have universal pre-K, that means that you have to get there and pick up your child at a certain point in time during the day. And how can you do that? You can't leave work, you can't get there. What we're saying is that the Minnesota model is this scholarship where you have pre-K education and child care. So the child care providers are rated, and there's a 4-star rating system. That's called that's the Minnesota model. It's a 4-star rating system, and you have to be a 4-star to get these, or a 3 or 4-star to get this type of scholarship aid for the kids who are going to come in there. And that's a subsidy that allows the parents to afford pre-K education. So scholarships are a way to provide the educational road from a pre-K standpoint for those who could not otherwise afford it. And we have to take care of the least able to pay first. That's what we're saying.
So in your ideal proposal here, you would want the kids to start at like age 2 and be covered
0.
way back, okay, infancy, have child care.
And by 0, I mean 0. I mean, there's a lot of studies that have been done about mothers who read just when the baby's in utero.
Mm-hmm. I've heard a little
bit
about that.
And then it starts when they're born and then all the way through. I mean, that is the type of education that people that have means, you've seen that being done. So their kids start with a tremendous advantage. And other kids who don't have this start way behind and they don't catch up. So that's part of the problem that we're facing. Now, you got to get them to good schools once they have good pre-K, because if you have good pre-K and you go to a school that's not teaching well, you can fall behind again.
Right. But just thinking of the early childhood, then you're saying start way from the beginning, get good child care, give scholarships to families who need it, and then don't just do the 4-year-olds, but get everyone covered.
All the way back, right. So what you have is you have child care, and you have child care where the child care provider is a 4-star rated child care provider. So they know how to teach at that early age.
And then do you have coverage too worked into the plan so that when school is over at 3:30, there's someone that can pick up and
that's not part of that, but that, some of these
thinking
child
of the
care providers, they stay
parents.
there, yes.
Yes,
they stay
okay.
there and they'll stay till 5 o'clock, yes. That's absolutely true.
How are legislators that you've had a chance to visit with responding to this vision?
I think, Ryan Winkler, who's now back in the legislature, is very good on these issues. And he's going to do, I think, a great job on the Democratic side. The Republicans, quite frankly, have been good on this.
I've heard that.
Yeah, they really have been. And I think it's become a little bit of a political football issue because Education Minnesota has been opposed to the scholarships. And that's the union, not the teachers. I think the teachers understand the need for this. And the union, its job is to provide jobs for its members, which that's their fiduciary duty, and they should be doing that. And so they say, no, we want universal pre-K as opposed to the scholarships, because that means that the schools and the teachers that are there are going to have more classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been that bit of a struggle, and because Education Minnesota has been a big supporter of the Democrats have not really been as supportive as the Republicans have in this issue.
It's very interesting, and it's pretty bipartisan if we look around the nation too, isn't it? From what I've
What's more
read.
bipartisan than children?
Well, that's true.
I mean, seriously.
We were talking ahead of time, right?
In this day and age, the way we have politics as it is today. But this is Minnesota, and what we've said is that this ought to be the second Minnesota miracle. You and I remember the Minnesota miracle with Wendy Anderson.
Back to Wendy.
And we had a whole funding. That's where the state took over funding of schools. And we can have a second Minnesota miracle here and eliminate this education achievement and opportunity. And it's not just an achievement gap. It's not that the kids can't learn. It's that they don't get the opportunity to learn. So you have to have the opportunity before you can achieve. And opportunity comes from very early getting the type of instruction and guidance and education that you need to compete as you go forward.
Well, it's exciting to hear about this. And do you think it can be, can funds be appropriated this year? I mean, is this something we can move on?
Yeah, there's
shouldn't be kicked down the, kick the can
it's not
down
going to
the
be.
road.
It's not going to be kicked down the road. The question really is come down to, Mary, is how much is going to be allocated to it. Because right now we have a lot of money going into, it's what, $70 to $80 million it's going into scholarships already. So but we need more. We need more because we want to take care of the 35,000 kids that are at the lowest end of the economic ladder, at 185% or less of the federal poverty level. And so, what that is that's about, for a family of four.
Translate?
Family of four, it goes from, that's about $25,000.
Okay, that's
And 185% would go up to about 45,000 roughly.
Okay.
Don't hold me to it exactly, but it's somewhere from $25,000 to $45,000. So you think of that, a family of four at $25,000, $30,000.
Yeah,
I mean, how can they afford
that's
childcare?
tight.
And good childcare.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times what we have is the childcare is, it might be a neighbor, or it might be granny, or it might be an aunt, or whatever. That aunt is taking in maybe 10, 12 kids in the neighborhood. They can get trained with the parent-aware rating system to where they get a 4-star rating system. And so the money, your money, my money, everybody's money is being used effectively because it's given to teachers or child care providers who are trained to teach kids at those ages.
We're on the front lines, so to speak.
So, because you want to spend the money effectively. So that's one of the arguments that, for example, Education Minnesota will make is that, well, if you have teachers in the public schools and they're licensed, et cetera, we know that these teachers can teach, and we don't know what the child care providers will be able to do. Well, that's where the 4-star rating system comes into play. And that makes sure that we are effectively using the taxpayers' dollars.
We're almost out of time. Got a couple minutes left, but you're not thinking it's all going to be tax supported, right? I mean, we're still going to lean on foundations and businesses.
Absolutely.
So it's
I mean, our foundation,
multi-pronged approach.
I'll just give you an example. The Ciresi Walburn Foundation, which started out as the Robbins, Kaplan, Miller, and Ciresi Foundation for Children, we have made grants over the 20 years, and we instituted this as a result of the tobacco lawsuit. And we funded it with $30 million at the outset.
Which was, I read, the largest gift to a foundation in the
law
country.
firm. Yes,
from a law firm.
It was.
Yeah.
And so, I'm very proud of the fact that our law firm at that time did it, and that, and it was at the institution of the law firm and the instigation of Roberta Walburn and myself. So that the name of the foundation has now been changed to the Ciresi Walburn Foundation for Children. But put that aside, that foundation over 20 years of its existence has made grants of over $24 million.
That's a huge
and we're just
hunk.
one foundation, and we're a smaller foundation.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of foundations, the Best Buy Foundation, the 3M Foundation, Target, the Minneapolis Foundation. We can go on and on and on with all of these foundations which have given money to education in Minnesota. And
do you have a percentage what you would like to see from government?
well, the most has to come from government, by and large.
What percent do you think?
I don't know. I can't give you a percent, but the overwhelming majority has to come from government because it's the largest. It has the largest ability to raise the money from all of us. Now, here's the point. What better thing to put our money to in Minnesota than education? Because that's creating the citizens of tomorrow who are going to be working in this state and providing economic productivity in this state, which will go to everything that we need, right? So.
That's a great way to end. That's a
Thank you.
winning
Good
statement.
investment, right?
A real good investment. And maybe we need to put a little Minnesota guilt into people too when they hear that we're the lowest right now in terms of the gap.
I think we have to keep saying that. I mean, it's a moral outrage.
That is
We want to be last.
persuasive. Yeah, We don't, do we? No, no, no. Well, we want to give you just a quick resource that you can check into. His Close the Gaps by 5 organization is something you might want to look into and read about. And if you just go to closegapsby5.org, you can find out more about that. And I think also going to your Ciresi Conlin website, it links to
It does. And
that
can
as
also
well
link
as
you to the
the
Ciresi Walburn
foundation.
Foundation, and there's all kinds of papers on there.
Yes, it's
Exactly.
a great website. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to
So
have
good
you
to see you
back.
again.
Great
Thank you,
to have you
Mary.
back.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week. And think more about, we don't want to be number 50, do we? Keep thinking about what you can do. Thanks. Bye-bye.